10 years of flawless service taught Detective John Riley never to mix personal and professional matters. But when his pregnant wife ran off with a confidential police informant, and a bloodthirsty drug cartel picked up their trail, he faced an impossible choice. Saving the woman who betrayed him, who carried his child, meant jeopardizing a months-long operation and allowing criminals to escape justice. Staying silent meant becoming the murderer of his own unborn son. He had less than a day to decide what was more important: the duty of a police officer or the vow he made before the altar, to be there in sorrow and in joy until death do them part. Wet asphalt reflected the dim light of fluorescent lamps in the police station. John Riley leaned over his desk, completing the final reports of the day. His fingers trembled slightly, the result of exhaustion after a 16-hour shift. The department was filled with its usual evening quiet, broken only by the monotonous hum of the air conditioner and the muted murmur of the television in the break room, where the duty sergeant was watching the evening news. The telephone rang unexpectedly sharply in the sleepy silence of the station. John reached for the receiver, automatically nodding the time: 7:43 p.m. Detective Riley speaking. His voice sounded tired but professionally clear. "Good evening, this is Nurse Sarah Collins from Central City Hospital." A soft female voice sounded in the receiver. "I'm trying to reach Mrs. Rachel Riley regarding her test results, but she's not answering her phone. Could you please ask her to contact us as soon as possible?" Something in the nurse's tone made John wary. Over the years, he had learned to pick up on the slightest notes of anxiety in other people's voices. "Test results?" he asked, straightening up in his chair. "I didn't know my wife had any tests done. Is it something serious?" "Unfortunately, I cannot discuss medical details with anyone other than the patient herself." The nurse's voice sounded sincerely regretful. "Just ask her to call us back, okay?" Hanging up, John took out his cell phone and dialed his wife's number. Long beeps sounded in the receiver, replaced by a mechanical voice. "The subscriber is temporarily unavailable." He frowned. Rachel always kept her phone on. It was their unspoken rule. His work required constant contact, and his wife, a psychologist at a rehabilitation center, understood this perfectly. He dialed the number again, same result. A vague sense of unease stirred in his chest. Rachel should have finished seeing patients 2 hours ago. Parking the squad car near the house, John went up to the second floor. The apartment was silent. An untouched lasagna sat on the kitchen table, Rachel's favorite dish, which she always made on Thursdays. Next to it was an open bottle of wine and 2 empty glasses. She was obviously expecting him for dinner. John ran his finger along the rim of the glass, no trace of dust. It had all been prepared recently. Turning on the light in the living room, he noticed his wife's purse carelessly tossed on the sofa. Inside, lipstick, car keys, wallet, but no phone. That was strange. Rachel never went out without her purse. The bedroom was in perfect order. Only a crumpled makeup removal wipe lay on the dressing table. The indicator light on her laptop was blinking on the bedside table. John froze, looking at the computer. In 10 years of marriage, they had never snooped through each other's things. Absolute trust was the foundation of their relationship. But now, he opened the laptop. The screen came to life, showing an open email window. The last email was sent today at 3:47 p.m. The recipient, Thomas Shepard. Rachel and Thomas's emails told the story of a secret affair that had begun 2 months earlier. It all started with a chance meeting at the rehabilitation center, where Rachel worked as a psychologist with drug addicts. Thomas came there pretending to be a former addict seeking support. In reality, he was on a police assignment, looking for connections to a major drug cartel through the center's patients. But instead, he found Rachel. Their correspondence became more candid with each passing day. The first cautious admissions turned into passionate letters, full of longing and desire to be together. They met in secret in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, in the park, in a rented apartment. Rachel wrote about how she was suffocating in her habitual life, how their meetings had become a breath of fresh air for her. Thomas replied that he had never met such a woman, that he was ready to give up everything for her. "My love, everything is ready," John read the last email. "I can no longer pretend waking up every day in someone else's bed next to a man I no longer love. You made me feel alive. In a week we will be free, just you and me, new names, a new life. I'll be waiting for you at 5 o'clock at the old dock. Forever yours, R." John looked at these lines, and his professional world collided with his personal one, turning into chaos. Now he understood why Thomas Shepard's name seemed so familiar to him. He was the very person the narcotics department had embedded in Victor Ramirez's cartel, the largest criminal organization on the East Coast. 4 months ago, his superiors had assigned John to oversee this operation. Thomas was to gain the trust of the drug dealers by posing as a former addict wanting to make some money. The plan worked. He was taken on as a small-time courier. Gradually, risking his life, he climbed the criminal ladder, gathering information about supply channels and cartel leaders. Thanks to his data, the police had already prevented several major drug shipments worth more than $10 million in total. The decisive operation was to take place in a week. Thomas had finally gained access to the cartel's top leadership and was ready to hand over the entire upper echelon names, addresses, money laundering schemes. For this information, he was promised new documents, protection from the Witness Protection Program, and $500,000 from the funds confiscated from the cartel. But now, John clenched his fists until they ached. Now this cursed informant had decided not just to run off with the money he had stolen his wife. He remembered their last meeting in the safe house a week ago. Thomas was beaming with happiness then. "I met a woman, John. She changed my life." And he, like a complete idiot, just smirked. "Just don't fall too hard. In 10 days you'll be a different person." If only he had known. With trembling hands, John took out his phone and dialed Captain Frank Morgan's number. Despite the late hour, he answered after the first ring. "Morgan speaking." "Captain, this is Riley. We have a problem with Shepard." "What happened?" The captain's voice became instantly harsh. "He's planning to escape right now, and—" John hesitated for a second. "He's not alone. My wife Rachel is with him." A heavy pause hung in the receiver. "Son of a—" Morgan finally exhaled. "So that's why he insisted on immediate payment and new documents for two. Said it was for his sister who was being threatened by the cartel. Son of a gun. John, you need to know he's been our best informant in the last 5 years. Thanks to him, we've identified the cartel's international links. Politicians, big businessmen are involved. If he goes off the rails now—" "I know," John replied dully. "I know, damn it, but she's my wife, Frank." "Listen, son," the captain's voice softened. "We'll find them, but we have to proceed very carefully. If the cartel finds out Thomas is our man, they'll kill them both. And they're watching his every move, you understand. I'll get all our contacts on it now. You sit tight at home and wait for a call. And John, don't do anything stupid." Riley hung up and stared out the dark window. The rain had intensified, turning the lights of the night city into blurred spots. Somewhere out there in this huge city, his wife was about to start a new life with another man, with a man he had trusted. And in a week, they would disappear forever with new names and $500,000 in the bank. "Don't do anything stupid," the captain said. But hadn't he already done the stupidest thing in his life? Failed to notice how he was losing his own wife. Chapter 2: Truth. The phone rang again as the clock struck 11. John recognized the hospital number and felt a chill run down his spine. "Detective Riley speaking." "Good evening, this is Nurse Collins again." The voice sounded worried. "I'm sorry for calling so late, but your wife's test results require immediate attention. Since all our attempts to contact Mrs. Riley have been unsuccessful, and you're listed as her emergency contact." The nurse paused. "Well, I think you should know. Your wife is pregnant, about 4 weeks along." John slowly lowered himself into a chair. 4 weeks. That meant it happened before she started seeing Thomas. He remembered their last intimacy, that time after he returned from a 2-week undercover operation. Rachel had been waiting for him with a bottle of wine, wearing that black dress he'd given her last Christmas. They couldn't get enough of each other, as if sensing it would be their last night. "Detective Riley, are you there?" "Yes, yes," his voice rasped. "Tell me, is the baby okay?" "Based on the results, the pregnancy seems normal, but Mrs. Riley needs to seek medical advice as soon as possible. She requires special attention at her age." Age? Rachel had recently turned 35. They'd talked about children for a long time, but they always postponed it. First his career, then her work at the rehabilitation center, and now she was pregnant and about to run off with another man. "Thank you," he managed to say. I'll let her know." Hanging up, John covered his face with his hands. Everything inside him was roiling with conflicting emotions. Rage at Thomas for stealing his wife, the pain of Rachel's betrayal, fear for the unborn child, his child, damn it, who might be in danger if the cartel tracked down Thomas, and somewhere deep down, a faint hope that news of the pregnancy could change everything. After all, Rachel didn't know. She couldn't have known when she decided to leave. But did it matter now? What if she was just using the pregnancy as a pretext to stay with Thomas? "Look, darling, it's fate. Now we can become a real family." John stood up abruptly. No, he wouldn't let that happen. He would find them no matter the cost. And to heck with the operation, the cartel, the captain's orders to stay home. This was about his wife and his child. Professional skills took over his emotions. John grabbed a notebook and began methodically writing down everything he knew. 10 years in the police force had taught him. Every investigation begins with gathering information, even if it's about your own wife. The first thing he did was call the phone company. A detective's badge worked wonders. In 15 minutes, he had a printout of all of Rachel's calls over the past month. He knew most of the numbers, her parents, friends, colleagues from the center. But one number appeared on the list almost daily, usually late at night. The calls lasted an hour, sometimes longer. John ran the number through the police database. It belonged to a disposable phone, purchased with cash, of course. Thomas was too careful to use his real number. But the date of purchase, 2 months ago, coincided with the start of their affair. Next up was the New Life Rehabilitation Center, where Rachel worked. Only the night shift remained at this hour, but John knew that Martha, an elderly nurse who'd worked at the center for more than 20 years, always lingered late in the break room. She knew all the gossip, all the secrets, all the staff romances. "Detective Riley," Martha asked in surprise, opening the back door, "is something wrong?" "Looking for Rachel." He tried to make his voice sound casual. "She's not answering her phone and she's not home." Martha gave him a strange look. "She left around 5, said she wasn't feeling well. But you know," the nurse lowered her voice, "she's been leaving early a lot lately. And that new guy from the rehab group." "What new guy?" John tensed up, even though he already knew the answer. "Thomas, I think. Good-looking guy, former addict. He showed up a couple of months ago. First he went to group sessions, then signed up for individual consultations with Rachel." Martha shook her head. "I shouldn't be saying this, but there was something off about their relationship. Too personal for a doctor-patient thing. And then he suddenly stopped coming to sessions, but I often saw his car in the parking lot. A blue Ford, kind of beat up." A surveillance vehicle, John thought to himself. The same one they issued Thomas for his undercover work. "What time did they usually meet?" he asked. "Most often after 5 when the workday ended." Martha clearly felt uncomfortable divulging other people's secrets. "Listen, detective, I know it's none of my business, but Rachel hasn't been herself lately. Kind of high-strung, distracted. And today she brought in her resignation. Said she was leaving town. I thought maybe you were being transferred to another department." John shook his head. "No, Martha, I'm not being transferred anywhere." "Oh," she pressed a hand to her mouth. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "You've been very helpful," John interrupted her. Tell me, do the security cameras in the parking lot still work? Yes, of course. The recordings are stored in the security office, but at this hour. I have a warrant, John lied. In critical situations, sometimes you have to disregard procedures. I need to take a look at today's recording. The security guard, a young man named Kevin, didn't even ask about the warrant. For him, a detective's badge was enough of an argument. He quickly found the files and opened them on the monitor. 4:47 p.m., Rachel exits the main entrance. She's wearing a light business suit and low heels. John remembered choosing them with her last month. She looks around nervously, clearly waiting for someone. 4:52 p.m., a blue Ford pulls into the parking lot. Thomas. The car stops in the far corner where the camera barely makes out silhouettes. 4:55 p.m., Rachel walks quickly to the car. Even on the grainy footage, you can see her clutching some kind of folder to her chest. Apparently, the resignation Martha mentioned. 4:56 p.m., Rachel gets into the car. The Ford leaves the parking lot, turning toward the western outskirts of the city. Can you rewind to the previous days? John asked, trying to keep his voice professionally detached. The recordings for the past month showed a clear pattern. 3 or 4 times a week, usually after 5, the blue Ford would appear. Sometimes they would leave together. Sometimes Rachel would get into her car and follow him. The route always led to the western part of the city. Thanks, Kevin. Copy today's recording for me. John held out a flash drive. Leaving the center, he took out his phone. It was almost midnight, but some connections work around the clock, especially if you ask correctly. Sally, sorry to call so late. Remember you said I could call any time. Sally Ramirez worked as a dispatcher in the traffic police. 3 years ago, John helped her get rid of her abusive husband by arranging new documents and a place in the witness protection program. Since then, she had been his eyes and ears on the roads of the city. Sure, I remember, handsome. What do you need? Blue Ford Taurus, license plate JKL 247, headed west around 5 p.m. Check the cameras on the city exits. 1 sec, the sound of keystrokes could be heard. Got him. Passed the checkpoint on the Western Highway at 5:20 p.m. Spotted at a gas station in Millbrook at 5:45 p.m. And at 6:10 p.m. turned onto the old coastal road leading to the abandoned docks. John tensed up. The abandoned docks were a favorite spot for smugglers and drug dealers. There were plenty of vacant warehouses and old houses, ideal for temporary shelter. Anything else? Yeah, the car stopped near the old Primorsky 6 warehouse. That's a mile from the main complex. Know the place? How could he not? 3 years ago, they had raided an illegal drug lab there. A 2-story brick building, seemingly abandoned, but inside, living quarters, a generator, a surveillance system. Is the car still there? The last camera at the entrance to the docks recorded it at 11:15 p.m., heading into the city. One figure behind the wheel, presumably a man. So Thomas had returned to the city, and Rachel had stayed at the docks, or gotten into another car. Thanks, Sally, I owe you one. Forget it, handsome. Consider it gratitude for a new life. John got into his car and turned on the GPS. It was about an hour's drive to the docks. He knew he was violating the captain's direct order to stay home, but there was no choice. Rachel was out there somewhere, possibly in danger. After all, if Thomas was playing his own game, if he decided to double-cross not only the police but also the cartel. The thought sent a chill through him. The Ramirez cartel was notoriously brutal to traders, and if they tracked down Thomas, if they found out about Rachel, no, he couldn't even think about it. At the same time, in Mexico, in a luxurious mansion on the shores of a lake, Victor Ramirez was finishing dinner. The head of the largest drug cartel on the East Coast was nearly 50, but he looked no more than 40. An impeccable Brioni suit, silver at the temples, the well-groomed face of a successful businessman. Only his eyes betrayed his true nature, dark, ruthless, like those of a predator. Boss, Carlos, his head of security, entered the dining room. We have information on Shepard. Just as you suspected, he's definitely a rat. Ramirez dabbed his lips with a napkin. Speaker. My people spotted him near the old docks. He was meeting some woman there. Carlos placed photos taken from a distance on the table. But that's not all. We checked his calls over the past month. He's been in regular contact with a Detective Riley from the narcotics department. We believe he sold us out completely. Ramirez carefully studied the photos. In one of them, Thomas was helping a woman out of a car. Her face was blurred, but her figure seemed vaguely familiar. What do we know about this woman? Rachel Riley, the detective's wife, works as a psychologist at the New Life Rehabilitation Center. Carlos smirked. A funny coincidence, don't you think? Our guy's having an affair with the wife of the cop who's handling him. There are no coincidences in our business. Ramirez tapped a finger on the photo. Yes, he is definitely a cop, damned informant. Absolutely, boss. Ramirez leaned back in his chair. The question is, why did he decide to act now? And what does the woman have to do with it? Carlos pulled out another document. We hacked his email. He's running with the detective's wife. According to the emails, they're supposed to get new documents and a large sum of money in a week. In a week, Ramirez narrowed his eyes. But we have an important meeting next Friday. All the cartel leaders in one place. Coincidence? I don't think so. He's definitely planning to sell us out, get the reward, and disappear. That's what the new documents are for, to cover his tracks. He stood and walked to the window. The surface of the lake shimmered with the reflections of the setting sun. Beautiful, almost as beautiful as blood on snow. Find them, he ordered. Both of them. But don't touch them yet. I want to know their every move, every breath. And when the time comes, he turned to Carlos, we'll teach a lesson to anyone who thinks they can betray the Ramirez family. It will be done, boss. Carlos headed for the exit but stopped. What about the detective? Ramirez smiled, and the smile sent a chill down Carlos's spine. Let him look for his wife for now. Maybe he'll lead us to them himself. And if not, well, revenge is sweeter when you know your enemy has lost everything before losing his life. He returned to the table and took his glass of wine. The game was on. And as always, he, Victor Ramirez, set the rules of this game. A man who had built an empire on blood and fear. A man who never forgave betrayal. In 20 years at the head of the cartel, he had learned the most important thing. Traitors always make the same mistake. They think they can run. But no one escapes the Ramirez family. Never. Chapter 3: Truth. The private plane landed at the airport around 3 in the morning. A direct flight from Mexico, officially, a charter for a business delegation. Border Control didn't ask too many questions. All the documents were flawless, and generous tips took care of the rest. Victor Ramirez was the first to descend the steps. 6 men followed him, professional killers, the best in the cartel, all in expensive suits, with briefcases in their hands. Only an experienced eye could notice the subtle signs, a particular smoothness of movement, piercing gazes that assessed everyone they met, slight bulges under their jackets where holsters were hidden. The cars are ready, boss, reported Carlos, who was waiting for them at the terminal exit. My men are stationed around the perimeter. The warehouse is under surveillance. Changes in the target's routine. Shepard leaves the warehouse every morning around 8, returns at 5. The woman stays inside. Minimal security systems, just cameras around the perimeter and an alarm on the doors. Ramirez nodded. How many exits? The main entrance, a back door through the kitchen, and a fire escape on the second floor. All under control. Excellent. Ramirez got into the armored Mercedes. We begin in 12 hours. I want everything to be beautiful. and let Detective Riley get there, preferably just in time to see the finale. At that moment, 15 miles from the airport, John Riley parked his car in the shadows outside the abandoned warehouse. The old docks were shrouded in the pre-dawn mist. Somewhere in the distance, a ship was sounding its horn, a ghostly sound that emphasized the oppressive silence. The phone vibrated, a message from Mike Donovan, an old informant from the port. "Urgent, meet at the Anchor, it's about your wife." The Anchor was a rundown bar for dock workers, open around the clock. At this hour, it was only frequented by the most desperate drunks and those who truly needed to talk without witnesses. Mike was waiting for him at a back table, nervously fidgeting with a glass of stale beer. A skinny, perpetually unshaven docker with eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. But the information he provided was always reliable, perhaps because John had once saved his daughter from human traffickers. "Things are bad, Detective," Mike whispered when John sat down across from him. "A private plane flew in from Mexico an hour ago, Ramirez himself and his thugs." John felt his stomach clench. "They know about Thomas. Worse, they know about everything, about your wife, about the escape plans. They have photos, recordings of conversations." Mike looked around nervously. "I overheard Ramirez's main enforcer, Carlos, giving orders. They're planning an attack on the Primorsky 6 warehouse, today at 3 in the afternoon." "Why exactly 3? "They want to wait until Shepard returns from a meeting with the other drug cartel leaders. Ramirez likes to," Mike swallowed, "have the whole family together when he teaches traders a lesson." John glanced at his watch. 7 a.m. Just over 8 hours to find Rachel and take her to a safe place. But first, he needed to confirm that she was indeed there. "What else did you manage to find out?" "They've surrounded the warehouse but haven't moved in yet, waiting for the boss's orders." Mike finished his beer. "Listen, Detective, I know she's your wife, but those guys are real animals. I've seen what they do to those who—" "Shut up," John snapped. "I'll figure out what to do." Leaving the car half a mile from the warehouse, John moved along the abandoned buildings, trying to stay in the shadows. Years of undercover work had taught him to be invisible. The night vision binoculars he always kept in the trunk allowed him to examine every detail. The Primorsky 6 warehouse loomed like a dark giant against the brightening sky. A 2-story brick building with peeling paint and a rusted fire escape. It had once stored fishing equipment, then was a drug lab, and now it was where his wife was hiding. John methodically scanned the perimeter. 3 cartel surveillance cars, disguised as work vans, on the corners of the block. A sniper on the roof of the neighboring building. The telltale glint of optics gave away his position. 2 homeless men by the dumpsters, clearly Ramirez's people, judging by their military bearing. At 8:15, the front door of the warehouse opened. Thomas, in jeans and a leather jacket, quickly surveyed the area and got into the blue Ford. The car pulled away toward the city. A nondescript gray sedan followed a minute later. The cartel wasn't taking their eyes off the trader. John waited until the Ford disappeared from view and moved closer to the warehouse. Now he could see the windows on the second floor. A dim light was on in one of them. The silhouette of a woman flickered behind the curtain. She was walking around the room, talking on the phone. Even from a distance, he recognized Rachel's characteristic gesture. She always twisted a strand of hair when she was nervous. Suddenly, the woman went to the window and pulled back the curtain. John froze, peering at the familiar features through the binoculars. Rachel looked gaunt, worried, but at the same time happy. She was holding the phone to her ear and smiling, that special smile she used to reserve only for him. His heart clenched with pain and rage. He took out a directional microphone, another useful device from a detective's arsenal. Tuning the frequency, John managed to pick up fragments of the conversation. "Everything's ready, darling. The documents, the tickets. Yes, I can't wait either. No, don't worry, it's safe here, of course I'll be careful. Rachel finished the conversation and leaned her forehead against the cold glass. Her face wore a dreamy expression, so familiar and yet so foreign. John lowered the binoculars. There was no longer any doubt. His wife was indeed preparing to start a new life. Without him. The clock showed 9 a.m. In 6 hours, Ramirez's men would launch their attack. He had very little time left to decide whether to act or to allow the cartel to carry out its revenge. A revenge that would destroy not only the traitor Thomas, but also the woman carrying his child. John found a secluded spot between the containers and lowered himself onto the cold concrete. For the first time this endless night, he had time to think. To really think about what was happening and what he should do next. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of shared breakfasts, evening walks, quiet conversations before bed. Memories washed over him in waves. Rachel on their wedding day radiant, incredibly beautiful in her white dress. Their first apartment where she brought in a mangy street cat because she couldn't leave it behind. The difficult days after a failed attempt to have a child, when she cried at night and he couldn't find the right words to comfort her. Her support during difficult investigations, when he came home exhausted and drained. When did everything go wrong? Maybe when work started to take up too much time, or when they stopped sharing their fears and hopes, hiding in their own shells. He hadn't noticed how his beloved woman had turned into a stranger, capable of destroying their shared life without hesitation. But now she was carrying his child. Their child. The thought resonated with sharp pain somewhere under his ribs. The child they had dreamed of for so long had appeared at the most inopportune moment, like a mockery of fate. And in a few hours, Ramirez's men would come to kill them. As a police officer, he knew what he had to do. Thomas was a traitor who had jeopardized a months-long operation. His selfish decision to run off with another man's wife could ruin the arrests of the cartel leaders. After all, if they made a fuss now, they would cancel everything and the police wouldn't be able to apprehend them. Criminals would continue to poison the city with drugs, killing innocent people. Wasn't that what John had thought about all these years of service? About justice, about protecting the law, about his duty to society. But as a husband, as a man who had vowed to protect his wife in sorrow and in joy, could he let her die? Even after her betrayal, even knowing that she loved another? And most importantly, could he sacrifice their unborn child for the sake of duty? Rachel had betrayed him, that was true. But her sin was merely human weakness, a search for love and happiness, even at such a cost. And if he didn't warn them of the danger, if he remained silent, that would no longer be infidelity, but murder. Cold-blooded, calculated murder of the mother of his child. John took out a worn photo from his pocket, which he always carried with him. Their first day in their new home, they were sitting on the porch, tired and happy, dreaming of the future. He looked at the young, smiling woman in the picture and understood. No matter what she had done, no matter how she had hurt him, he couldn't become her executioner. There are sins that can be forgiven, and there are actions after which you can no longer look in the mirror. John knew that saving Rachel might ruin his career. The captain would never forgive him for derailing the operation. His colleagues would consider him a traitor, but none of that mattered. Because there are things more important than duty, more important than justice, more important than revenge. Life, love, an unborn child who was innocent of everything. John stood up and checked his weapon. 5 hours remained until the cartel's attack, enough time to find a way to warn Rachel without alerting Ramirez's men. He would save her, not as a loving husband, but as a man who couldn't allow the death of innocence. And then let her live her life. The main thing was that she lived. Time passed agonizingly slowly. John watched as Thomas's Ford returned around 2 in the afternoon. The cartel's men immediately sprang to life. He saw them talking on their radios, taking up positions. An hour remained until the attack. Suddenly, the silence of the old docks was shattered by a burst of automatic fire. Ramirez's men had begun their assault simultaneously from three sides, through the main entrance, the back door, and the fire escape. They moved like a well-oiled machine. Two held the perimeter, one sniper controlled the windows on the second floor, the rest went on the attack. Victor Ramirez watched the operation from the armored Mercedes parked not far from the warehouse. A slight smile played on his lips. He was enjoying the show. At this moment, John Riley, sheltering behind a stack of rusty containers, was frantically trying to figure out how to get to the warehouse. Escape routes were cut off. He saw the cartel's men had taken all the strategic positions. The direct route was being targeted by the sniper. The tunnel had likely already been discovered and blocked. The shots were getting closer. John spotted the forked truck near the far wall of the warehouse. The old machine created a dead zone in the sniper's line of sight. If he moved fast, hugging the ground. John waited until the sniper shifted his attention to the windows on the second floor and ran for the forked truck. Bullets chipped concrete just inches from his feet. Someone in the cartel had spotted him moving. But it was too late. Using the massive machine as cover, John reached the side wall of the warehouse. Now he needed to find a way inside. The broken windows on the first floor caught his attention wide enough to crawl through. Listening to the sounds inside the building, he cleared sharp shards of glass with the butt of his pistol. The first scream came unexpectedly. On the stairs leading to the second floor, one of the cartel's men tripped over a tripwire, an old police trick that Thomas probably remembered from training. The explosion of a stun grenade momentarily blinded the bandits. Taking advantage of the confusion, Thomas opened fire from behind metal lockers. "Miguel's down," came a voice over the radio. "The bastard's got a submachine gun." A second cartel gunman tried to flank the lockers, but Thomas reacted instantly. A short burst, and the man collapsed with a bullet through his chest. Carlos swore into the radio. "Don't be a hero. He's a former cop. He knows what he's doing. Jose, flank through the ventilation. Ramon, cover me." John was making his way through the first floor, ducking under bullets. The shootout upstairs was intensifying. He could hear Thomas's heavy breathing, the sound of a slide being racked, the muffled commands of the cartel's men. They were cornering Shepard. Suddenly, a woman's scream came from above. "Rachel!" John lunged for the stairs and immediately recoiled. Bullets splintered the handrail inches from his head. "Drop your weapon, Thomas," Carlos's voice boomed under the ceiling, "or your girlfriend dies first." "Don't listen to him," Rachel shouted. "Run." Thomas peeked out from behind cover. "Let her go, she doesn't know anything." At that moment, a metallic screech came from above. Someone was crawling through the ventilation. Thomas looked up at the sound, and it was his mistake. A bullet hit him in the shoulder, spinning him like a rag doll. The submachine gun fell from his weakened hands. "Got you, traitor!" Carlos stepped out from behind a column, aiming at the wounded man's head. "The boss wants to talk to you, but for now—" He turned to Rachel, who was being held by two of the cartel's men. "We'll have some fun with your woman." "That won't be necessary," came a calm voice. Victor Ramirez appeared in the doorway. His expensive suit seemed out of place among the dust and blood. "I don't like my men being distracted from their work." He walked through the room, each step echoing in the sudden silence. Thomas, clutching his wounded shoulder, glared hatefully at the cartel leader. "You know what always amuses me about undercover cops?" Ramirez took out a handkerchief and carefully wiped dust from his lacquered shoes. "You try so hard to become part of the family that you actually start to feel like you belong, and then you betray us, like true members of the family." "Go screw yourself," Thomas croaked. "Is that it?" Ramirez shook his head. "I expected a more interesting last phrase." At that moment, there was a click of a hammer being cocked. John stepped out of the shadows, his pistol aimed at Ramirez's head. "Let them go." Carlos turned instantly, but Ramirez stopped him with a careless gesture. "Detective Riley, I've been expecting you," He didn't even turn around. I must admit, you surprised me. Protecting a wife who betrayed you, it's so noble and so stupid. I'm telling you one last time, let them go. Or what? Ramirez turned now, looking straight into John's eyes. Shoot me. And then what? My men will riddle you with bullets before my body hits the floor. You're a cop detective. You should think logically. I am thinking logically. John took a step forward. If your men open fire, the first bullet gets you, and you don't seem like a man ready to die for his principles. Ramirez laughed, but there was no joy in his laughter. I like you, detective. An honest cop, a faithful husband. Even after betrayal, you're willing to risk your life. People like you are rare these days. Don't you want to work for me? He slowly raised his hands, showing his empty palms. Okay, let's talk like reasonable people. I'm offering you a deal. The movement was lightning fast. Ramirez snatched a pistol from his shoulder holster. John reacted a fraction of a second faster. 2 shots merged into one. Ramirez's bullet went into the ceiling, while he himself, with a bullet through his chest, collapsed onto the concrete floor. Boss, Carlos roared and opened fire. A real bloodbath began. John managed to dive behind a column. Thomas, despite his wound, managed to reach his weapon and returned fire. Ramirez's men were shooting from all positions. Bullets chipped fragments from the walls, ricocheted off metal structures. Rachel, get down, John shouted, seeing how the 2 thugs holding his wife had released her to join the shootout. She darted for cover, but it was too late. A stray bullet, ricocheting off a beam, hit her in the head. Rachel jerked strangely and slowly slumped to the floor. A dark stain began to spread around her head. No, Thomas lunged toward her, but another bullet hit him in the chest, throwing him back. John didn't remember how he crossed the bullet-riddled space. He fell to his knees beside his wife, pressing his fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, weak, barely perceptible, but it was there. Hold on, sweetheart, he whispered, pressing on the wound. Just hold on. Somewhere in the distance, police sirens sounded. Apparently, someone from the area had called the police after hearing the shootout. Ramirez's men, realizing that their boss was dead, began to retreat hastily. No time for prisoners, they had to save their own lives. Thomas lay motionless, staring at the ceiling with glazed eyes. 2 bullets in the chest had left him no chance. And Rachel, John held her close, feeling her blood soaking through his shirt. The sirens were getting closer. Help, he screamed as the first police patrol burst into the building. I need an ambulance, quickly. Final chapter, The Choice. Ambulance sirens cut through the night silence. John sat in the emergency room, losing track of time. His hands were still covered in Rachel's blood, his shirt soaked through, but he didn't even notice. The same image kept replaying in his mind. Her body collapsing limply onto the concrete floor, the dark stain spreading around her head. The operation had been going on for 4 hours. Neurosurgeons fought for her life as John paced the hospital corridor. He didn't pray, he didn't believe it would help. He just waited, counting his steps and trying not to think that with each passing minute, the chances were getting smaller. Detective Riley, a surgeon, came out of the operating room pulling off bloody gloves. His face was gray with fatigue. We've stabilized her condition, but... That but hung in the air like a death sentence. The bullet damaged critical areas of the brain. We removed it, stopped the bleeding, but the damage is extensive. The surgeon spoke slowly, carefully choosing his words. Your wife is in a deep coma. Frankly, we can't guarantee she'll wake up. John slumped onto a hospital chair, feeling the ground slip out from under him. What are the chances? In cases like this, less than 10%. And even if she regains consciousness, the likelihood of serious neurological impairments is extremely high. I'm very sorry. The intensive care unit was filled with the hum of life support machines. Rachel lay motionless, entangled in wires and tubes. Bandages hid half of her face. Only the steady beep of the heart monitor confirmed that she was still alive. Detective Riley, Dr. Stevens, the head of the intensive care unit, entered the room. "We need to talk. Please sit down." They settled in his office. On the table were scans of Rachel's brain, like black and white photographs of distant galaxies. "I have to be completely honest with you," Stevens began. "The damage is very serious. The coma could last for weeks, months, or become irreversible. In such cases, we usually prepare relatives for," he hesitated, "the most difficult decision." "You're talking about disconnecting her from the machines." John's voice was hoarse. "That's one of the options we'll have to discuss, but there's something else." Stevens took the test results from a folder. "Your wife's pregnancy seriously complicates the situation. It's early, only 5 weeks, but the fetus is alive and developing normally." John leaned forward. "So the baby can be saved?" "Theoretically, yes. Modern technology allows us to sustain life support for a long time. We can try to maintain the pregnancy until the fetus becomes viable. But what? It's risky. It will require a whole complex of medications, constant monitoring, and most importantly, we don't know how the body will react in a coma. Every day of life support will reduce your wife's chances of recovery. In addition, the cost of such long-term treatment." "Money is not an issue," John interrupted him. "What exactly needs to be done?" Stevens began to explain the medical details, but John was only half listening. One thought kept running through his head. He had a chance to save their child, a child they had dreamed of for so long. Even if Rachel had betrayed him, even if she was going to leave, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the tiny life that had begun before everything went wrong. "You need to think carefully," Stevens finished. "This is a decision that cannot be made spontaneously. Talk to your family, weigh all the pros and cons." "No," John said firmly. "I've already decided we're keeping the baby." He looked at Rachel's lifeless face through the glass of the ward. She had always wanted children. Even after 2 failed attempts, she hadn't lost hope. "One day we'll have a baby," she used to say, "and it will be a real miracle." Now that miracle had finally happened, albeit under such terrible circumstances. "I'll sign all the necessary documents," he told Stevens, "and I'll find the best specialists, do everything possible for both of them." At that moment, rapid footsteps sounded in the hallway. Captain Morgan, rumpled and unshaven, but with a victorious gleam in his eyes. "John, we got them all." After Ramirez's death, the cartel had crumbled like a house of cards. Encrypted files were found on Thomas's computer, complete information about the organization's structure, addresses, accounts, and names of couriers and middle-level bosses. SWAT teams conducted simultaneous raids on 20 locations. 130 arrests in one night. Morgan waved his arms excitedly. 40 million in drugs seized. 3 labs busted. The state attorney called personally to congratulate us on the success of the operation. John listened, looking through the captain. Somewhere out there in another world, his colleagues were celebrating the greatest victory in the department's history. A gang that had terrorized the East Coast for 20 years had ceased to exist. Criminals behind bars, the streets were cleaner, justice had prevailed. "Are you listening, John? This is a huge success. Can you imagine what's going to happen now?" "Yes, Frank, I can imagine." The captain finally noticed his detached look, stopping mid-sentence. "I'm sorry, how is she?" "In a coma, the doctors say the chances are slim." John paused. "She's pregnant, Frank, we're trying to save the baby." Morgan slumped heavily onto a hospital chair. "God, why didn't you say anything earlier? If I had known." "What would have changed?" John smiled humorlessly. "Everything happened as it was meant to happen. At least the cartel can't hurt anyone anymore." 2 weeks later, Captain Morgan appeared at the hospital again. This time he was in full dress uniform, with some kind of folder under his arm. John, I have news. The commissioner personally signed the recommendation. You're being transferred to the Narcotics Bureau federal level. Office in Washington, promotion of 2 ranks, full benefits package. Morgan held out the papers. This is a chance to start over. John didn't even look at the documents. He was sitting next to Rachel, holding her lifeless hand. No, Frank, I'm staying. Listen, I understand how you feel, but think rationally. Every memory will haunt you here. A new city, a new job. I said no. John looked at the captain. She's carrying my child. I'm not going anywhere. Morgan sighed. Do you realize she may never wake up? I understand, but it doesn't matter. Half a year passed. Every day after his shift, John came to the hospital. The doctors had gotten used to him, the silent detective who sat for hours at the bedside of the woman in a coma, reading her books, telling her about his day. The pregnancy, against all odds, was progressing normally. On the ultrasound monitor, you could already see a little heart beating in time with the mother's heart. A boy, the doctors said. A healthy, active baby. You know, John said, stroking his wife's now visibly rounded belly, I've been thinking about a name. Remember, you always wanted to name our son Michael. I think that's a great name. Only the steady hum of life support machines answered him. But it seemed to John that sometimes, when he talked to her, the instruments would beep slightly differently. As if somewhere there, deep in the coma, Rachel could still hear his voice. He no longer thought about betrayal, about Thomas, about what could have been. All that was in the past. Now only the future mattered, a tiny life growing against all odds. Their son, who would one day open his eyes in this world. And Rachel, well, he would wait, as long as it took. For once they had vowed to be together in sorrow and in joy, in sickness and in health. And John Riley was not one to break his vows. The beep of the heart monitor echoed off the walls of the ward. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in the colors of hope. If you liked this story, support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your emotions in the comments. Thank you.